I was just trying to arrest him and thinking there'd be no reaction. So there's always been extreme hostility on the part of the US. Mainly, I think, Ms. Muqtada is the most important leader on the Shia side who's consistently called for an end to the US occupation, for a US withdrawal. And also maybe because he's a cleric, he wears a black turban, so in many minds of many American politicians, maybe he looks alarmingly like a younger version of Ayatollah Khomeini. But I think the main thing they have against him is that he wants the U.S. to withdraw.
Now, the southern part of Iraq obviously has the bulk of the production of oil. I think about 1.5 million barrels a day are coming out of the area around Basra. To what extent is this latest battle having an impact on the production of oil, or to what degree is it a battle over who's going to control that oil?
Well, it's already having a massive impact on the export of oil, because one of the main pipelines was blown up overnight. So, you know, this is, if there's a battle in Basra, then the Mahdi army can, in fact, stop most of Iraq's oil production by simply blowing the pipeline and preventing anybody repairing it. They're also in a very strategic position, because the main U.S. supply lines between Kuwait and Baghdad go just to the west of Basra, so they could start attacking the convoys there. So they're in a very strong position. I mean, there's a slightly different question, which I think you're hinting at there, which is how much is it a fight over oil? Well, in Basra, yes. I mean, the money comes from various ways of diverting oil, of getting your hands on oil at cheap prices. You know, it's a pretty corrupt place. A friend of mine the other day, Iraqi businessman, had a container come into Muqtada port, which is just south of Basra. And I remember he was telling me that transport, he's sending it up to Kurdistan in the north, a city called Arbil. Transport to Arbil cost him $500, and he spent $3,000 in bribes. And that's kind of par for the course. Of course, also you have oil diverted into tankers, and these are major sources of revenues for all the militias. But it's not just the Mahdi army. It's in Baghdad, you have exactly the same. You know, where the regular army controls a gas station, they're always diverting supplies. Somehow it runs out of gas in a couple of hours, but everybody waiting in the long queues knows that the oil has been diverted into the black market.
Well, Patrick Cockburn, the other aspect of Basra and the south, obviously, was that the British had supposedly successfully managed to pull out of the main population areas. But now we're having, there's at least one retired U.S. general, Jack Kane, has urged the British to reconsider their withdrawal from Basra. What does this suggest for the long-term Bush administration strategy of handing over to the Iraqi army the pacifying and the control of the country?
You know, I mean, I think that there's, I mean, first of all, the British aren't going to do that because they had a very rough time in Basra. And in some ways, the British position is worse in Basra than Americans in American army in Baghdad. I mean, a British military intelligence officer was saying to me, you know, the problem in Basra is we had no friends. Basically, nobody likes us there. Now, in Baghdad, the occupation is not popular, but I think it's fair to say at the moment, after all the slaughter we had, 3,000 people killed every month in 2006, that Sunni and Shia in Baghdad hate and fear each other more than they hate and fear the U.S. Army. I mean, not that they particularly like them, but if you're, let's say, a Sunni in Baghdad, and somebody kicks your door in at 3 in the morning, you'd probably prefer it to be an American soldier, in which case you might survive, rather than the Iraqi police commandos who are all Shia, in which case you're likely to have a very unpleasant death. So, but going back to Basra, the British don't want to move in. They had a rough time, and they also think the militias would unite against them if they tried to do so.
And you've been to Iraq numerous times. You're here in the United States. We're hearing more and more, obviously, especially in the presidential campaign, John McCain repeatedly, the Republican candidate, repeatedly saying how the surge is working. The casualties are down, where the United States is, quote, winning in Iraq. Your sense from all of your visits and your reporting there as to this analysis or this view of the surge or the escalation of the war?
You know, I have a sinking feeling in my stomach when I hear things like that. And I was in Baghdad when McCain was there. You know, people say to me, are things getting better in Iraq? And, you know, in one sense you could say they are, because a year ago we were having, as I said earlier, 3,000 civilians slaughtered, tortured to death every month. This month we're probably going to have 1,600 civilians killed. So, you know, so in a sense things have got better. We've gone from 3,000 to 1,600. But, you know, we've gone from 100% bloodbath to 50% bloodbath, but it's still a bloodbath. So I think it's really ludicrous for Vice President Cheney or Senator McCain to say, you know, we're on the verge of victory, things are good. And then there are, you know, there was famous television of McCain in Sharjah Market in Baghdad last year saying American people aren't being told the truth about Iraq. Now, very noticeably, he didn't go back to Sharjah Market when he visited us a couple of weeks ago, and one of the reasons might be that his security advisors would say, don't go because the market's controlled by the Mahdi army. So really this is very deceptive. There's something of an improvement in security in Baghdad. A lot of this has to do with the fact there are no mixed areas left. So Sunni and Shia don't really mix, that we have a truce with the Mahdi army. But, you know, it's still a city which is the most dangerous in the world. And that's really what should get through to people outside Iraq.
I'd like to ask you, we have about a minute left, but the Pentagon and the White House have repeatedly claimed that that Sadr and his followers are being supported by Iran and backed by Iran. Your sense of Iran's role in the battle now between the two Shia, or the Shia-dominated government and the Muqtada forces?
It's always been exaggerated as regards Muqtada because the Sadrists and his family have always traditionally been anti-Iranian. Probably when the US started opposing them strongly, they thought, well, the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So they've been going to the Iranians. They get a certain amount of support from there. But, you know, I think that as soon as the US decided to overthrow Saddam Hussein, who was the great enemy of Iran, there was going to be an increase in Iranian influence in Iraq, and the Shia, who are 60% of the population, were going to take over from the Sunni. These things were going to happen and will still happen. So I think that imagining that one can stop them simply prolongs the violence there. And this idea that Muqtada and the Iraqi Shia are somehow all clones of Iran, I think is some of the most poisonous sentiments in the Middle East, because it sort of ratifies sectarian hatred. The Iraqi Shia have their own interests. Sometimes they're backed by Iran, which is not too surprising. But they're not clones or pawns of Iran.
We'll have to leave it there.
But if they're treated as such, then they have to rely on
Patrick Cockburn, we'll have to leave it there.
But
thank you very much for being with us. Patrick Cockburn, Iraq correspondent for the London Independent. Latest book, Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia Revival. She's covered the invasion occupation from the government for the past 5 years. You've been listening to Democracy Now! Juan Gonzalez with you. Thanks very much for listening.